Hey everybody, welcome back to Men Need to Be Heard. It's Dan, and we got another exciting show for you today. So, I have as my guest someone that I started talking with a few months back over on the IG, as I call it. He's got quite the following over there, and I love what he has to say there. And we've gotten to know each other a little bit and collaborate on some things. And I really wanted to have him on because one of the things that I like to talk about from time to time is where we're at as men and fathers. And, kind of assess the situation, see what we need to do. And so I wanted to bring my good friend, Alan Donovan on. Hello, Alan.
Hey, Dan, how are you today?
I am fan-freaking-tastic. And, you run an organization called Fathers Lives Matter, which, as everyone who follows me knows, near and dear to my heart. It's how I got started in this space. So I wanted to have you on. We're going to talk about that, what the issues that fathers face and some of the things that you and I both think need to be done. But before we jump into that, how about you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, Alan, who you are, and whatever you want to share personally.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, Dan, as you know, I'm a single father. Okay. I have full custody of my son. I got my introduction into this whole father's rights universe, men's rights universe back in 2015 when I went to family court for the first time. I went in there thinking that, oh, yeah, it's the justice system, Lady Justice. She's blind. She's holding the scales. She's going to do me good. Dude, she didn't do me good. I went in there and I got my butt handed to me. I had an attorney. At the time, I was a mid-level manager in UPS. I'm a good person. I don't have any crimes, no felonies, none of that stuff. I don't drink. I don't party. I was dedicated to being a father to my son. Okay. I went into family court and I was told basically, hey, you don't have any right to be in your son's life. Mm-hmm. Okay. I was dealing with a situation where my son's mother had substance abuse issues, all kinds of things. I brought all this different kinds of evidence into the family court and it was basically kicked in the nuts and said, yeah, no, dude, that's not happening. Okay. I had spent thousands of dollars on an attorney, which obviously anybody that's dealt with an attorney understands that it's non-refundable. Once you write that check, drop them that cash, it's gone. You're never going to see it again, regardless of what the outcome is. So I turned around, I fired my attorney, and I had another court date coming up 6 months down the road down in Kentucky. So I was faced with some pretty serious issues. I had to do a lot of soul searching and figure out what I was going to do because, I didn't have the money to go out and drop another 5 to 10 grand on an attorney down there. So I decided, you know what? The best person to represent myself, my rights, represent my son's rights is me. Mm-hmm. So I spent the next 6 months teaching myself family law in the state of Montana and the state of Kentucky where my son was, where court was. I went down there 6 months later, walked in there. The judge looked at me and goes, Mr. Donovan, where's your attorney? I said, Your Honor, you're looking at him. And he was kind of like, hey, what's up with this guy? He kind of looked me up and down and said, you understand that if this does not go the way you want, you can't turn around and declare mistrial or claim a mistrial.
Right.
I said, yeah, I understand that. He's like, well, are you ready to do this? I said, yeah. I walked out of there with 50-50 custody. Nice. And before the judge rendered his verdict, he looked at me and he goes, Mr. Donovan, you're not from here, are you? I said, no, I'm from Montana. He goes, have you ever been here? I said, I have not. He goes, do you know anybody down here besides your son, his mom, and her parents? I said, no, I don't. He goes, did you come by yourself? I said, yep. He goes, so you don't know anybody down here other than, them. You've never been here. You traveled here 2,000 miles by yourself to fight for your right to be in your son's life. I said, that's correct, Your Honor. He goes, I got to tell you, in the time that I've been doing this, he goes, you are the most well-prepared father I have ever seen walk into this courtroom. Wow. I walked into the courtroom with 20 binders.
Wow.
Of documentation and everything that I had put together over the last 6 months. He goes, I tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and grant you 50-50 custody, legal and physical, which is a little interesting because I didn't live in Kentucky. at the time. I was 2,000 miles away.
Well,
in
that, I was
Montana,
going to
so
ask you about that. Is how did he come to that? Because they normally don't like you crossing state lines because it takes you out of their
yeah,
jurisdiction.
I think the fact was he was just so impressed with me and everything that I had done, and the fact that I had taught myself family law. I had gone to these great lengths to be a part of my son's life. That he was like, all right, I'm gonna do this father a solid. And so that's what he did. And the funniest thing was, down there, the opposing attorney writes up the brief and everything and files it. So I had to wait for her outside the courtroom. Okay. And she walked down, she handed me the brief, and I shook her hand. I looked her in the eye and I said, you know what? This is really fun. We should do this again. And I tell you, Dan, man, if looks could kill, I would have been dead.
It is a sweet situation. I actually had a
Oh.
similar one to that where I was going up against guardian ad litem, and the judge knew me at that point because I'd been coming in that courtroom forever. But long story short, we go through the whole thing, and he at one point towards the end of we're doing the hearing. At the end of it, he turns to her and he goes, "He knows family court law better than you do." I still haven't gotten the daggers out of my body that I got from her eyes at that point. But it is.
Oh, it's
a
such
sweet
an awesome feeling.
It is.
Yeah. And so at that point, I had quote unquote 50-50 custody. But the shenanigans weren't over. I mean, this kind of just intensified the shenanigans basically. And so I went another, year, 2 years in this kind of situation. And then I found myself back down in his courtroom again, because her mother had got involved and pulled some fast shit. And so basically I was fighting for custody all over again, back to square one. I walked into that courtroom and it was the same judge. He recognized me. He remembered me. He greeted me by name. He said, "Mr. Donovan, how are you doing today?"
You made quite the impression then if they do that.
I did.
Yeah.
I was in court for 20 minutes and I walked out with full custody of my son.
Wow.
Okay. So Fathers' Lives Matter. I started that after I got my butt kicked in court the first time, because I got home and, I was just shocked. I was devastated. I didn't know what the hell was going on. And so I got online and, started typing away and looking at what there was out there for fathers. And there's nothing. There's no kind of support system out there for fathers dealing with this stuff. Now, if you're a woman and you're a mother, hell, there's everything under the sun for you. But fathers, there's not. And I started Fathers' Lives Matter as a way to kind of chronicle my journey through the whole system, to gather support for because I didn't have support for myself. My own father pulled me aside and told me, "Hey, I should just take whatever they're offering me and be happy for it." And I said, "You understand, they're offering me 1 month a year. Okay. 1 month in the summer out of the entire year." I said, "What kind of relationship are you going to have with your grandson?" "Well, I just don't want you to get your hopes up and go down there and get devastated again. So I just think you should do what they're offering." And I was like, "No, that's not how this is going to work. I am not going to just be content with the scraps. I'm going to go down there and I'm going to go for it all, because I'm his father. I'm his protector. That's my job." And so once I got full custody, I had maybe, I don't know, less than 5,000 followers at this point. It was slowly building up, but I had this decision to make where I could just, delete the account, give the account over to someone else, or take everything that I had learned and start passing it on down to all these other fathers who were in the same situation I was, but weren't as fortunate as I was. And so that's what I started doing. And then later on, it morphed into a podcast because, these fathers, they don't have a voice. Nobody out there gives them a voice. Nobody out there will let them tell their story without being judgmental or interjecting their own opinions into it. So that's where the Father's Truth came from. Is I started the podcast where I just want to give these fathers the ability to tell their stories without the preconceived judgment. And so now here we are, and it's kind of morphed into this thing where, I also, look at men's rights issues because they dovetail together. You can't get one without the other.
Absolutely.
And how we connected was, the infamous Lady SB up there in Toronto and the shit show she's done and pulled. And so that's kind of the space where I'm at right now. I kind of occupy this line where it's father's rights, men's rights, um, and it's a never ending thing because, I get upwards of 100 messages a day from fathers. And one of the things that I've found now over the last, I guess, about a month, I'm starting to get messages from teenagers that are on the other side of these brutal divorces that are watching their father be alienated by their mother.
Al, that's an interesting point you made right there because you know what? I'm seeing the same thing. I would
Yep.
say for me, it started probably 4 to 6 months ago. And back then, I had done a couple videos on parental alienation.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought anyway, that was part of the reason for it. And I don't know if you know Maddie from the Anti Alienation Project.
I don't.
She started doing videos. She was an alienated child. And has been talking about her story since roughly June, give or take. I had her on the podcast a couple weeks back. But I noticed, I mean, she's had tremendous growth. And I think it is fueling, and much like you and I experienced, she's hearing from teenagers.
Yep.
I think there's a growing awareness among the teenagers about the realities of it. What is it, Gen Z? I forget which Gen is.
Gen Z. Yep.
Yeah, I can't keep them all straight. But they seem to be a little bit more aware of how fathers have been screwed. And so, what are you hearing from them? Just out of curiosity, I want to see if it's similar to what I hear.
Well, okay. So, perfect example, and not all the messages are, hey, my father's being alienated. Like the example that I'm going to give you is somebody reached out to me from Glasgow, Scotland last night. And he said, hey, Alan, I'm just hoping maybe you can kind of help me with these feelings I'm dealing with towards my father. So the father apparently cheated, on the mother and family. And it's, obviously caused a divorce. And, the son, he's 16. He has a lot of very hard feelings towards his father. And he's like, how do I deal with these?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, have you gone to counseling? Okay. If you're not, you need to go to counseling. You need to be able to talk about these feelings. Don't keep them balled up inside. It's stuff like that. It's, I get messages from these, teenagers asking, how do I deal with my mother alienating my father?
Mm-hmm.
How do I deal with her? Because you and I both know a lot of times when we have these mothers that are alienating the fathers, they're very high conflict parents. And it doesn't matter if it's towards the father or towards the children, because we see that a lot. We see that anger
absolutely.
and resentment
Yep.
for the father come out towards the children. So they're like, how do I deal with this? How do I approach my mom? How do I tell my mom I want to see my father? So it's a lot of stuff like that. And it's just so weird because I never started seeing this until recently. It's always just been fathers. And every now and again, I'll get stuff from stepmothers. And then I also get death threats. That's another
Yeah, I dealt with one last summer
Yeah.
where, I mean, this was a serious one to the point I had to get police involved, law enforcement involved. But it's interesting what you're saying because I get the same type of messages. I get a lot more along the lines of what they're feeling because I've talked about my story as an alienated child and as a parent who had a child alienated against him, a couple of them. And when I talk about it, I think they feel comfortable coming to me and going, I have these feelings. It's very similar to what you're talking about. And what do I do about it? And of course, I'm not a trained mental health provider, right? So I try and get them to help. But that said, I mean, I was a domestic violence counselor for men, so I have some peer training in that, but way beyond my scope to handle that. But it's just interesting because I'm seeing the same ramp up. And it makes me wonder why, though. I'm curious if you have any thoughts. What do you think is driving this? Because it is ramping up.
Well, I think it's social media. I think,
Really? Okay.
Anybody has the ability now to go on to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, X, I guess now it's called, TikTok. And you see these people like you and I and, all these other influencers in these various spaces that are talking about this. And, we put a lot of videos of ourselves up there for everybody to see. We talk about our life story and it lends, I don't want to say a relationship to these random people that see it, but there's a familiarity where you start watching, this guy, Alan Donovan on Father's Lives Matter. You watch his videos, you see what he says. And you develop this familiarity where you're like, okay, what if I reached out to this guy? What if I reached out to Dan?
Mhm.
Because they talk about this stuff all the time. Maybe they have some insight that they can give me. So they do that. They reach out to us and hoping that we'll answer their messages. And I think social media is the driving force behind that, because when you and I were kids, we didn't have this.
Oh, it wasn't
Social
even
media
talked
didn't
about. No.
exist.
Yep.
Yeah.
The
And
internet
so
didn't exist.
yeah,
That's how old
what
I am.
options did we have? Because I'm a product of divorce. Okay, my parents got divorced when I was 8 or 9 years old, and I dealt with the bouncing back and forth between my mom's house and my dad's house. And outside of talking to the school counselor, my dad or my mom or friends, I didn't have anybody else to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
And now with the internet and cell phones and social media, you literally have the world at your fingertips. You can reach out to somebody that's clear across the country on the other side of the world that talks about something you're dealing with. And maybe they might reach back out to you and talk to you and open a dialogue. So I think that is obvious. I think, to me, obviously, that's what's driving it, in my opinion.
I agree with you. And I think also there's a little bit more openness or willingness to have discussions just in general.
Yep.
Society seems to be waking up a little bit. I think it's the work that people like yourself and myself have done where we share our stories and it is resonating with people. And I do think it does create that personal connection because I can't tell you, and I know you get the same thing, how many people have reached out to me and said, geez, I thought it was just me.
Yep.
That type of thing. And that's why and I know you do the same. I always say to men, you have got to share your story. I know it
Yes.
can be difficult. It can be painful, but the more you share your story, one, you're going to get more, you're going to catch hell from some people,
Oh,
that.
yeah.
But it's 10 to 1 in positive, and if you can compartmentalize the negative, you'll get a lot of benefit for yourself out of it. But you're also breaking down the barriers.
Yep, and there's a healing factor
There is,
to it
yes.
for yourself to get on there and unburden yourself and tell your story, and have somebody reach out and say, "Hey, Dan, you know what? I know exactly what you're talking about, man. I went through that last year."
Mm-hmm.
There's a major healing factor in being able to do that. And like you were saying, I had that very same premonition, or not premonition, but that very same belief when I first started going through this is, oh my God, I must be the only dude in the world going through this. And I get online and I find out, I'm one of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of
Millions and
fathers
millions, yes.
that are going through this thing. So you're not alone, and you discover that. But it takes courage to step up and go, hey, I'm Alan. I was an alienated father.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Dan. I was an alienated father. And I think that's one of the things that is slowly, what's the right wording here? We're slowly making progress in that, because I also think that's one of the biggest negatives with fathers fighting for their rights is they're scared. They're scared shitless to step up and, quote unquote, rock the boat, because so many of these fathers have fought for every little scrap that they get, and they're scared to death that if they rock the boat, what little bit of visitation, phone calls, FaceTimes that they have with their children is going to be yanked away.
That's an interesting topic. Maybe we should delve into a little bit, because you're right. I hear it all the time. The guys that I work with individually and try and coach them through, it's primarily guys going through a divorce. And there's two things that I always notice. One is that fear you're talking about, but it's also that lack of, I'll use the term education, because they believe the mythology out there, and you are a perfect example that you can get educated yourself and handle it. I am as well. Your story and mine, I was kind of chuckling when you were telling your story. I'm like, that was me 20 years earlier, because mine was 1995. Walking into the courtroom and thinking that, truth and justice were going to be the way it was. And
there's going to prevail.
Within about 2 minutes, figuring out truth doesn't matter in the least bit, and there's no such thing as justice in a family court. But
and that's exactly it. That's one of the biggest things that family court thrives off of, is the lack of education for fathers. The family court thrives off of the fact that once you get served those papers stating, whatever the case may be, custody modification, child support, RO, TRO, all those different things, any sense of, what's the word I'm looking for? being able to logically think goes out the window, and you go into fight or flight mode.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
that's why I think so many fathers end up in such bad situations, is because they make these rash decisions that come from not being educated on the family court. Family court thrives on the fact that they know you're going to screw up and make a mistake, and they can pounce right on that.
And that's something I know you're doing and I'm trying to do, is to educate guys that,
Yep.
here's the reality of family court. Yeah, the deck is stacked against you. We're not saying it's not, but as your proof, and I am too, because I ended up with custody after 10 years.
Well, congratulations, though. That's big.
When you end up on a first name basis with a judge and you see each other out having dinner, and he's a couple tables over and he comes over, hey Dan, how you doing? I'm like, his name was Courtney Hall. Hey Courtney, how are you? It's like we were like buds, and I'm like, this is just so wrong on every level.
Yeah.
But one of the things I try and when I'm talking with guys, it's along the lines of what you're saying is, take a step back, take a breath. What can you accomplish? Because every situation is unique. But also, and you kind of mentioned it with your father, is don't listen to all the naysayers out there. We're not saying they're wrong, because what your father said to you was coming from the heart, is because he cared about you, obviously.
Yep.
But and for him, maybe it was reality, because that's what he believes. So I don't fault him for that. But the other side of it is, it's not entirely reality. You can't. Guys do win, however you want to define win. But it's getting guys, and more importantly, in my mind, the general public to understand that, one, the deck is stacked against fathers, because there's plenty out there that don't believe it is. They're like us. You walk into that courtroom, it's law and order. You're going to present your case, and you're going to be it. First of all.
I did a post week before last.
Okay.
And it was a video of a woman walking up and basically looking into a door cam and stating, this, and this about this thing. She wanted to see her kids on Christmas. I don't know what the background was of it, but my assumption is that they were going by the parenting plan, because she mentioned the parenting plan and stated paragraphs specifically that it wasn't her Christmas to be with the kids, which is, it's very normal. Parenting plans, a lot of them rotate major holidays. But she went on to bust out his doorbell cam with a brick. And this guy was in the comments, and he's like, oh, he just needs to lawyer up, get a lawyer, go to court, they'll make it all better. And I said, dude, that is not the way it works. I said, there is no guarantee that if you go to family court and you have even this kind of footage, that you're going to walk out with anything. I said, chances are more likely that you're not gonna. And, just this whole stream of comments after, I think there was like 150 comments. Well, that's not right. You don't know what you're talking about. Blah, blah, blah. I was like, dude, trust me. I know what I'm talking about. I've been doing this for almost a decade. I said, why do you think there are millions of fathers out there saying the same thing? Why do you think there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of fathers' rights groups? There's a reason this all exists. And it's not because the courts are fair. I'll tell you that.
It's a difficult situation. When we're interacting with I call it the younger guys, because one of my goals is to educate the younger guys about the realities of the world, whether it's dating, because I'm like you, my initial focus was family court, and then it became domestic violence, and now it's everything to do with men.
No.
Any issue men and boys have, I will talk about. But it's, when you're talking with especially the younger guys, and I see myself in them, and I'm sure you do also. We believe we're invincible. It's that whole mindset. And I'm like, you have no idea, dude. And the ones that come at me, more often than not, I'll say to them, I'll see you in 10 years, or I'll see you in 15 years. But when you come to see me and go, I can't believe this happened to me, I'm going to go, I told you so. So just remember that. But do you think the reason they do that, this is something I want to explore real quick. Do you think they do that out of naivete? Do you think it's something else? That's one thing I'm trying to figure out myself is, as we try and educate it, the pushback, I expect it from the ladies. I expect it from the feminists. All of that doesn't faze me in the least. But it shocks me how many of the younger ones will push back going, you don't know what you're talking about, dude. What's your thoughts on that?
So I think it is naivety. I think it's just how they were brought up. I think that it's never having experienced family court and not coming from a sense of actually understanding what you're talking about. I'll give you a perfect example because, one of the things I do, you know, I'm very active on Instagram. I look at other things. Just like anybody, I'm scrolling through my reels looking at stuff.
Hmm.
And if I see something that piques my interest, I'll go in there and I'll take a look at it and I'll comment. There was a video of a father that, the premise was the father showed up at his daughter's birthday party and he was violating a TRO and that he had a warrant out for his arrest. And so I'm looking through the comments, blah, blah, blah. And, there was a guy in there that was talking about how ridiculous it is that anybody had any sympathy for this guy because he was violating a TRO and had a warrant and all this other stuff. And I got into a discourse with this guy and we were talking about the family court. And he was running his mouth, talking about how, if the judge said that, then there's obviously a reason why the judge had finding. We need to go with that judge and ask no questions. Okay. And I said, seriously? I said, do you honestly think that's how it works? I said, have you ever been to family court? His answer was no. He had never been to family court. And I said, then, dude, honestly, you don't know what you're talking about. I said, I'm a survivor of family court. I said, the odds are when you go into family court, the deck is stacked against you. Well, I'm gonna trust what the judge says. I said, really? I said, you come back and talk to me after you've been to family court. Because I went and looked at his profile. He's got a young child, he's married. And I said, I hope that you never have to go to family court. I really hope you don't, because chances are if you go to family court, you're putting all your eggs into that one particular basket that they're gonna come back and do you right. I said, I was the same way as you. Mm-hmm. I said I had that very same viewpoint before I walked into the family court that justice was going to prevail. I said, it doesn't work that way. Well, yeah, I'll just take my chances. I said, well, then, come find me after you do take your chances and let's talk again. Let's see if your perception has shifted, because I bet it will. And that's what I see with so many of these young guys. They're talking from a sense of it's almost entitlement.
That's a good point.
They've never experienced this.
Yeah.
They have no clue. They see social media. They see accounts like mine, like yours, and all these other things, and they've watched TV and they become these lawyers in their head, and they're like, "Oh, it can't be that way," and it's just being naive. Your sense really changes after you experience it firsthand.
I've actually had the same kind of conversations, and I've said to them, "Go observe family court," because in most states, those courtrooms are open unless it's an adoption situation. There are certain times they will close the courts.
Yeah.
But in general, they're wide open. And I say, go sit there. You can't say anything. You just have to sit there. Don't disrupt anything. It blows their... I've actually had a couple do it, and it absolutely blew their mind because they're not in the case. They're just observing, and they're like, oh, my God. And it's like, yeah, dude, that's what you got to do.
I had, 2 summers ago, I had somebody, they did not follow me. But every time I posted a video, they were right there in the comments. They were like the first or second comment in the video. And it was always very negative things they would say about the topics that I was talking about fathers, about family court. And finally, I got tired of it. I said, hey, look, and it was a woman. She was a true blue, dyed-in-the-wool feminist. Mm-hmm. She admitted it. I said, hey, what state are you in? She told me what state she was, and I looked it up, and I said, okay, so family court is open to you. I said, I challenge you to go down and spend the day at your family court. Watch everything that happens. Watch the proceedings. Take a look in the eyes of these fathers as they walk out of court, absolutely destroyed. I said, and then you come back and you talk to me. And she went silent, and I didn't hear anything for about a month. Mm-hmm. She didn't post anything, any comments in any of the videos. And then lo and behold, one day I get a message from her, a direct message. And she is like, oh my God, I am so sorry. She goes, I had no idea family court was like what you were saying it was. She goes, I went down and I spent not 1, not 2, but 3 days in family court. Mm-hmm. And wow. She goes, I am fucking shocked. Mm-hmm. She goes, I have never seen anything like that. She said, I thought for certain that you were full of shit. She goes, I thought that there was no way that the family court could be anything like this guy was talking about. She goes, I thought you were just making it up. She goes, I thought you were just, being stupid and trying to say stuff just to get followers. But she goes, what? She goes, I'm so sorry. Everything that you're saying is true. She goes, I cannot believe how badly fathers are screwed.
Yeah, like we've both said, until you've been through it, you have no idea. And I always try and get people, reporters especially, because I've had, I get requests for interviews from time to time. I had one not too long ago, and I'll say to them, same thing we're talking about, go down to family court and just sit there. And some of the things that I'm reflecting back 5, 6 years ago, I was talking with a reporter, and he was a young kid just out of college, basically. And he's doing the story, and I said, go down to family court. Blah, blah, blah. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll go with you. So down we went. And I said, again, because some people, you got to like counsel them to go, you cannot talk. You're in the gallery, You're not allowed to talk. So we're sitting there, and, a couple of the cases were relatively minor, no big deal. But then a pretty serious one came along. And the first thing I said to him, I said, watch how long this takes. He goes, what do you mean? Because, they haven't quite started yet. I said, this is, you could kind of tell it was a complicated case, right? I said, watch how long this takes. I said, this case will not last 20 minutes. And he, and it was a pretty brutal case. I was a little off. It was 25 minutes is all the time they were given for this judge to make a decision on a child's life. And this was a young child, 2, 3 years old. And I'm like, that's the reality, right?
Yeah.
It's not Law and Order. You don't get 2 weeks to portray your case. You get about 10 minutes. She gets about 10 minutes. And this judge, because I defend judges to a point. There's a lot of bad about them. But one thing that I don't think many people realize is they're in a horrible position. They read the case notes, the various motions and all that stuff. Then they're sitting on the bench, and they've got hundreds of cases they got to pump through. If you get 10 minutes, 15 minutes, you're doing good, And then they have to make that decision. And this reporter, the reason I bring it up, this reporter afterward goes, that's so wrong. And I went, exactly. And I said,
that's what I've been telling you.
And I said, don't even just forget the parents. It's not about mom and dad. Think about the child. That the next 15, 16, 18 years of that child's life were largely determined in 25 minutes.
25 minutes. Yep.
And I've talked with lawyers many times. They're like, 20 to 30 minutes is max. Because they're pumping days.
And a lot of times it's not even that. It's they get them out as quickly as they possibly can. It's I liken it to a cattle market. A cattle auction. They're getting them in and out, in and out, in and out. If they can get through 100 cases a day, that's good. And I think the other part of the problem is I see so many of these judges that are so negative about everything anymore, that they see this time and time again. If you're doing 50 cases a day, 5 days a week, you're burnt out. You don't really care. Quickly. You're just trying to get through it, to get to the end of your day, to go the frick home. And I think that's another part of the problem.
To your point on that, in New York, where I was, the county where I was in, the family court judges were elected, and it was a 10-year term. So these judges do burn out fast. And again, they do a lot of bad, but I defend them a little bit in the sense that, just like you said, they may see 50 cases in a day, couple hundred in a week.
Yeah.
And they some of them are minor, he came and showed up, she wouldn't give me the kids. And those are, I don't want to make light of them, but relatively speaking, they're easy. Then they see the worst of the worst.
Yeah.
They see the horrific child abuse, and they have to deal with that. And again, there's not a lot of time involved. So that's what I want people to understand is if you're going into family court, especially as a dad, this is what you're up against. This is the reality, and you need to get educated. One of the things I always tell fathers that I'm coaching, Go to family court, not your case. Go watch, just like we talked
Yeah.
about.
Go watch, take notes,
So that
see
when
how the proceedings go.
exactly, so when you walk in there, you're prepared. So you don't go through what
Yeah.
you went through and I went through, where I was like a deer in the headlights, going, "What the
Yeah.
frick just happened?" You know.
Yeah.
What do you think in general? I like to get people's opinions on this. What do you think would be the best approach to, let's call it, fixing family court? How do we address this issue?
I think the number one thing that needs to be addressed is the money. Money runs family court. There are so many people that don't realize the depth that money has on the family court system. Because when you look at child support, that's the other big argument with the family court system. Can't have one without the other. Child support is funded, okay? Child support gets money back from the federal government. So that court system that you went to, that I went to, when they impose a child support case on a father or a mother, whatever the case may be, they get a kickback from the family court for that child support case. They also get a kickback for different metrics that are met. Okay. And then you factor in whatever it costs for your attorney, the thousands upon thousands of dollars. You got to look at the cost to actually file your case. Your amendments, your briefs, that all costs money to file. That's not free. So family court is well wrapped around with money. I think if you take money out of the equation, the whole thing either collapses or changes for the better. Because if family court, so the model of the family court is what's in the best interest of the child. Okay, that's what they claim. That's bullshit. Family court is what's in the best interest of the family court. If they truly cared about the child and what was in the best interest of the child, they would not be making a profit off of that child, off of that father, off of that mother. But they do. So it's a business. Family court is a business at the end of the day. You take that away and make it actually what it's intended to, I think that would be the best change you could ever make in the family court system. Along with, 50-50 presumed out the door. That's the other one.
Right. Yeah, I call it, I couch it the same way, but I use different verbiage. I call it the greatest wealth transfer organization in the history of mankind.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's exactly what it is.
Here's another thing.
Go ahead.
Here's another thing I liken it to. The military-industrial complex.
Yeah.
That's basically the family court. Because you look at all the subsidiaries, all the umbrellas, CPS, child support, lawyers, gals, custody evaluators, the psychologists that are attached, they're all under the umbrella of the family court system, which is under the umbrella of the Social Security Administration. It's kind of a crazy little mix of shit there, but yeah, it's basically the military industrial complex.
Yeah, for those that don't know, what we're essentially talking about is Title 4D. Which drives the whole thing. It did create this paradigm, and initially, because I've talked with people back in the 70s and then the revisions in the 90s about it all, and politicians that were involved, by the way, and they had the best of intentions, but they can have all the best intentions of the world, but they were completely misled, and they themselves are misguided. They bought into this belief that fathers were walking away in droves and not taking care of their kids. So, even though the laws are gender neutral, if you read between the lines, they're not. Then they created this monster called 4D and turned it into a huge profit center. Judges' retirements are funded out of it. Any competent, they don't even have to be good, competent, not even, I'll even go further, semi-competent divorce attorney is worth millions. I mean, it's
exactly.
And people don't understand. This is something just the general public, but fathers really need to understand is any money you got in the bank, any assets you have, what's the first thing that almost every lawyer you go meet with wants to know? Give me your financials.
Yeah, they want your financials.
And the same for her. And anyone who thinks that they're not getting those numbers so they can see how much wealth they can extract out of it is fooling themselves.
Bingo.
Now, there are exceptions to that. There are some really good lawyers out there that genuinely do.
I think that the really good lawyers are a very small minority of the overall set of lawyers. I think we run into more of these parasitic types that understand this guy's a dad who loves his kids. He's going to go to the ends of the earth, and we can milk that. We can milk the shit out of that until he is bankrupt and can go no further. And then we say, oh, I'm sorry. You can't, you can't pay your retainer.
Mm-hmm.
We can't provide you service anymore. I've seen that happen time and time again.
Well, the fastest way you'll see a family court case settle is when both lawyers know there's no more money to be gotten. You'd be shocked, guys, listening, how fast your case will settle after that in minutes. Like literally, they'll be in the courtroom going, all right, we're going to settle it. They'll go, because for those that have never been in, depending on your situation, but like you go in one room with your attorney, she goes in her room with her attorney, and then two attorneys go back and forth and play their little game. And
you're writing numbers down on a piece of paper and shuffling it back and forth.
Yeah, and I can't tell you the number of times either I or others have experienced it where there's no more money to be gotten, and we're going to settle your case, and it settles right then and there. Mm-hmm. An interesting thing that my attorney, and I had a very good one, and this is something that tipped people off, is my attorney would say to me, "You don't need me for this particular issue." She knew I was competent and educated and would do the research. You can go ahead and handle this yourself.
Yeah.
That's a sign of a good. Now, she was not cheap. Don't get me wrong. This is 20 years ago. I was paying her $400 an hour. I spent over 100,000, but it could have been 300,000, right?
Easily.
Because she was good enough of a person to say, no, Dan, go handle this yourself. Or, sometimes she would say, write the motion and I'll fix it. Because that can save you a ton of money, because people don't realize every minute you spend with that attorney, you're getting billed for 6 minutes, no matter how long it is in my case.
Yeah. And every email, all that stuff, it's all billable hours.
All of it. So she, to her credit, did everything she could to minimize it. But I still ended up spending $100,000. And that's the other thing that people need to be aware of. I agree with you. Money is the biggest driver. So I guess the next question is, you talked about shared parenting. How do we take the conflict out of it? One of the arguments I make is family court, in a nutshell, is set up like criminal court, where it's adversarial.
It's very adversarial.
We need to take that out, but how do we do that? Or what are your thoughts on how do we get that out of that?
And oh man, that is a tough one, because it is very much adversarial. It's the only thing that I have ever experienced where mudslinging is not only allowed, but it's suggested. I mean, the dirtier you can get, the better off you're going to be. And it would be tough to take that out of the family court, just because of the structure of the family court and the way it's built and the way it's promoted. Mm-hmm. They know damn straight that if you get mom on this side and you get dad on this side and you get the child in the middle, they're going to go at each other. You throw attorneys in the mix that, propagate this, and judges that are up there not doing anything. It becomes a very, very toxic situation. And I don't really know the way to take that out of it, because it's almost become a cultural incentive, I guess, if you will, because you see so many of these videos where I'm just going to take my baby daddy to court and they're going to do this and they're going to do that. Honestly, I don't know that there is a way you can get rid of the adversarial nature of the family court without collapsing the family court and starting from scratch.
Just out of curiosity, Alan, what are your thoughts on mediation?
I am not a proponent of mediation. Okay. I think that is a huge waste of money. I've worked with a lot of fathers that have gone to mediation, and depending on where you're at, like here where I'm at, mediation is $300 an hour.
It's not cheap.
You have to pay the mediator.
Right.
And, most of the time, the person that pays for that mediation is the father. Mm-hmm. And I have not ever really seen anything subsequently decent come out of mediation. A lot of times it gets dragged on, and then it gets rescheduled again. They can't come to an agreement, so it goes back to the judge. I think it's just another money suck that the family courts have come up with to further profit off of this whole thing.
Yeah, I'm of like-minded. I'm not against it, though. I have seen some successes. When I talk to people about things like that, I'm like, if you actually boil it down, when it comes to dissolving a marriage, dissolving a family structure, most of the time, the two parties will agree on about 80, 85, 90% of the issues. And then it's the rest of it that becomes the war. Generally, it's who's going to get the kids, right? We all know
Yep.
that. And I do think there's a possibility mediation could come and help. I do believe that. But the other side of it is, to your point, it is every bit as expensive as paying a lawyer.
Hmm.
And two, a lot of times the mediators, to be blunt, aren't very good.
Nope.
You know, I mean, I've seen some good ones, and I've seen some that are very jaded themselves, more so than family court judges. So
Yeah.
it's I threw it out there because I just was curious on your opinion, because I'm like you. I've been trying to answer that question I asked you since 1995, and I'm no closer to an answer now than I was then. I think we're at a point where we know something needs to be done, but I honestly don't know if anyone knows what can be done.
Yeah.
Be-
Well, and it's the family court is such a huge monster. It's so unchecked. I mean, it's just every bit as much of a monster as child support is.
Mhm.
And the, there's so many different little things that go into it that it's never been checked. Nothing has ever been done to restructure it that I am aware of. The only big significant thing I'm aware of is that they changed it from, the tender years doctrine back in the 80s to what's in the best interest of the child. That's the only relevant change that I know of that the family court has ever gone through. And even that wasn't that big of a deal. It was just more or less wording because it still came
It
out to be
was
the same
all
thing.
that was a rewording, right?
Yeah.
Best interest of the
It was just
child
a rebranding.
is the tender years doctrine.
Yeah. Yeah.
For those that don't know
Exactly.
what the tender years doctrine is, it essentially is the child is best with the parent that has raised them the most. I'm
Hmm.
breaking it down to a very simple sentence, but always mom, almost always.
Always mom. Yep.
And
And they just continued on with what's in the best interest of the child, predisposed that mom is what's in the best interest of the child. So yeah, once again, I guess my answer would have to be just collapse the whole damn thing. Start over.
okay, so let's presume we can do that. This is an interesting conversation now we're having, because I think this is, we didn't really intend to go here, but why not? This is a great conversation.
Yep.
So let's say we've nuked it. People are still going to get divorced.
Yeah.
What would you? Well, I mean, obviously, we could spend 5 hours on this, but short and sweet, what would be your structure you would create?
So the structure that I would create, number one, money's gone. Money is no longer the driving factor. Child support is gone. Okay. And 50-50 is the predisposed outcome out the door. Obviously, there are going to be situations where you just can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
That's obviously going to happen. But in the majority of these situations, the majority of the stuff that I've seen, you could easily go 50-50 out the door and everything would be fine. Okay. With that 50-50, dad pays for the kids when dad has the kids, mom pays for the kids when mom has the kids. Okay. That gets rid of the whole child support thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You build off of that. Another thing, judges. Okay. No more attorneys graduating up to judges. I think that's another issue that you have in family court. You have these family court lawyers that have been lawyers for 20, 30 years. They take the next step up to judgehood. They don the black robe, they get the gavel, they're behind the bench, they're making decisions.
Mm-hmm.
If they were a shitty attorney, they're going to be an even shittier judge. That just kind of goes hand in hand. So I think the judges should come from outside of attorneys. I think that's another big problem. Judges, if you're going to become a judge in the family court, you have to have kids. You have to have a base level understanding on the decisions that you're making on other people's lives. Because I don't know if you know this, I did a little deep dive in this last year. 60% of the family court judges that I looked into, they didn't have kids of their own.
Really?
Judgments
I'm
on
shocked by
families.
that number. Absolutely shocked
Yeah.
by that number.
So I think that should be a prerequisite. If you're going to be a family court judge, you have to have kids. Okay. Because you are making rulings that impact, other people's lives. So those would be my top things on what I would do with the family court system right out the door.
To couple of the points that you made, one of the basis that I always go by is the shared parenting. starting point of 50-50, adjust from there.
Hmm.
That's the bill that I tried to get passed in New York. My argument always being right now it's 100-0 when you're coming in. Start at 50-50 and come out. Because there are different, every situation is different. So
Yep.
you might end up with one parent getting 52-48, another family might get 60-40. Some may get the standard order, which is 85-15. That is what most cases are now.
Hmm.
But at least you're starting from an even point and then going from there. To your point on child support, it's funny. Most of the child support laws were originally written when moms were at home, stay-at-home moms,
Hmm.
and dad was out earning the money. And if we're trying to be fair, there was a valid point. That was an issue. That is no longer the case. Moms are
No.
out making money. In many cases, they're making more than the dads. So, it's, as you know, when you're a single father and you're paying child support, sometimes you got to go get a second job so that when the kids are
Well,
with you, you can feed
yeah,
them.
and that's exactly it. And I don't necessarily have a gripe against child support in of itself. I think, yeah, you should be responsible for your kids. My issue comes into play when, like you just said, when mom's out there making more money than you are, and you're still paying her child support, and you're paying child support to the point where, it's essentially, I don't want to say bankrupting you, but it's driving you to the poorhouse because these courts forget that, yeah, you're paying child support. You still have your own bills to pay. You still
Mm-hmm.
have to keep a roof over your head. You still have to keep the power on. You still have to have, food in the refrigerator because in order to have your kids, whether it's every weekend, whatever the case may be, you have to have a roof over your head. It's got to have power. You got to have food. You got to have all the essentials to provide for your child. But if you're paying, for lack of a better term, out the ass in child support and you can't afford that stuff, you can't have your kids. So it's this double-edged coin or double-edged sword that bites so many fathers in the butt, and they end up having to go out and get a second and third job because, as we well know, child support doesn't care. If you go and tell them, hey, this is what's going on, I can't afford this and this, they will dead ass look you in the face and say, go get another job.
And here's the part they don't
There's
tell you.
no sympathy.
They're gonna try and get child support percentage on that second, third
Yeah,
job.
child support's going to go up, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And it's this never ending cycle that fathers get caught in. And I truly think in a lot of cases, when a father legitimately becomes a deadbeat and walks away, I legit think that's the driving factor behind that because it gets to the point where, they can't afford to live themselves at that point. And, they make the decision, okay, well, when the child turns 18, they'll come find me. Other than that, I'm done. And they walk away.
Yeah, it becomes overwhelming mentally,
Mm-hmm.
emotionally, and physically.
Yep.
And people will say, "Well, he just needs to keep fighting." No, the issue is that he has to fight. He shouldn't have to fight.
He shouldn't have to fight for his child.
I mean,
That should never be a thing.
ever. And when you talk with the feminists or the moms groups, and you bring that point up to them, they're like, "He's got to fight." Well, no, what they can't fathom. And I will say to them, imagine if you had to fight to see your kids, if you had to fight to just be in their lives, or I'll use my case. So we were talking about the financial side of it. Is I had my kids, the standard order originally was, every other weekend, and I call it the pizza date, one night a week, right?
Yep.
You take your kids out for pizza. Well, I was living on ramen noodles. I
Mm-hmm.
would buy a pound of ground beef and a box of rice. That's what I was living on during the
Yep.
week, so that when the kids were with me, I made sure they could have good meals. Or we
Yeah.
could go
And
get a
so
pizza
many
or
fathers
whatever.
do that.
That's the
Yeah.
norm, actually. That's what people don't
Mm-hmm.
understand is, we say we care about the children, but yet we want to bankrupt one parent and then send the kids to them. And then when they can't take care of them the way you think they should be taken care of, the same as mom's doing, then we
Mm-hmm.
take their ability to see their children away from them. That
Yep.
that is family law in a nutshell. It's exactly where
Yeah.
we're at.
Absolutely. And then when you look at the whole child support issue, okay, if a father can't pay child support, he goes into arrears. Once the arrears reach a certain level, it's like, it can be anywhere from $1,000 up to $10,000. they start taking your licenses. They take your hunting and fishing license. They take your business license. They take your CDL. They take your passport. They take your driver's license. And then ultimately, when that's all done, they throw you in jail.
Yep.
Okay. But the child support doesn't stop at that point. So Joe Schmo is sitting over there in jail because he can't pay his child support. His arrears are continuously going up and up and up. He gets out of jail. Now he's, $50, $60, $70, $80,000 in arrears. He's never going to pay that off. He can't get a job, doesn't have a driver's license. You're setting these fathers up for destitution. Mm-hmm. You're bankrupting these fathers, so what chance are you giving these fathers? You're not.
And the bottom line is 40% of men who unalive themselves, or the new term, I guess, is self-defeating, because we can't use the actual term, or self-deleting. Sorry,
self-deleting.
That's the reason they do it, because you are beyond hopeless at that point. You're never getting out. There's interest accruing the whole time. So even if you try and pay it back, and you're being denied access to your children.
Yeah. And so, you have nothing to live for at that point.
Exactly. And that's exactly the mindset they have. And then who's the one who really suffers in all that? Dad suffers, yes, the child. Because these children grow up later on and they're like, man, Dad unalived himself. Children figure it out. They're not stupid. Some don't, but a lot of them do. And then they're living with a guilt that really isn't their fault. Would never fault a child like that. But, using myself as an example, my mother did everything she could to alienate me from my father. I eventually figured it out, reconciled, went to live with him for a bit. We could never recover fully all the damage had been done. I knew he loved me. We tried to talk, but it was always this chasm between us.
Yeah, there's always going to be that elephant in the room.
Exactly.
About what happened. And, to talk about, the fathers unaliving themselves, doing what I do. And I'm sure you probably get this as well, but I get the messages, the texts, the phone calls from fathers that are suicidal.
Oh, all the time.
And yeah, I had one a couple of years ago. I was out working on my Jeep and I got this text that said, "Hey brother, I just can't do this anymore. I'm ending it." No name, just a number. I didn't know who it was, but I was like, oh, shit. And so I called him and talked to him. And he was a father down in California who, he was just done. Financially, he was broke. He was beyond broke at this point. He was living in his truck. That's how far it had driven him. His ex-wife had filed multiple TROs, ROs on him. They kept getting thrown out because of all false allegations, but it was just kept building and building. And I said, what is going on? What do you think this is going to solve? Tell me your mindset, where you're at. And he flat out told me, Dan, he goes, my son will be better off without me in his life.
Oh, God, I hate it.
And I said, whoa. I said, stop. I said, why do you think that? And he went on to tell me that his son's mom continuously reinforces the fact to his child that he's a deadbeat, that he's a piece of shit, that he's never going to make anything of himself. And I was like, okay, I understand that aspect of it. But I said, stop and think about this for a second. I said, when you take a rock and you throw it in the lake, what happens? And he's like, well, there's a big splash. I said, but what else? I said, there's waves. Okay. Those waves, as they go out, they get bigger and bigger and bigger. I said, that is what is going to happen if you kill yourself. I said, how old is your son? His son was 8 years old. And I said, do you really want to put this legacy on your son? Do you really want to make this your son's future? Because I can guarantee you that your son's going to grow up feeling guilty that you did this to yourself. He's going to grow up thinking, what could I have done that would have stopped my dad from doing this? Because what his plan was, the next day he was going to go out to lunch with his son. They were going to go watch a movie, and then he was going to drive his trucks onto the train tracks and get hit by a train.
Wow.
That was his plan. And, I spent a couple hours talking to him, and then he hung up on me. And then I spent the next couple hours because I still didn't know where this guy was. This was just some guy who had seen my social media. And I used to display my phone number on my social media, and he just, last chance kind of thing, reached out to me. And, I ended up calling multiple law enforcement agencies down in California. I even ended up calling his ex-wife because I was able to find his ex-wife's number, and I had to go that route. Well, they picked him up. They found him and picked him up. and held him on a 72-hour psych hold. But that's just the kind of perception that these guys get. You bash on these guys enough, you tell them you're worthless, they start believing it, and they start thinking that my child's going to be better off without me in their life, when they couldn't be even further from the truth. Your child's going to be worse off without you in your life. And this is the legacy that you're leaving your children.
But they can't understand at the time. I mean,
No.
I've never gotten to that point. I can't even fathom reaching that point, if I'm being honest.
Neither can I.
I could never do it or even consider it. As bad as things were for me at my absolute worst, and it was in some cases very close to the story you're talking about. That was not an option. But it's funny because earlier this week I had this exact scenario happen. Right, a guy reached out, and actually he reached out to a couple of different creators, and we're trying to mobilize as best we can.
Is that the guy on TikTok?
Yeah. And, we're trying to get help and reach people, but we don't know where they are sometimes. It puts a lot of a burden on us. I feel guilty because I want to do more, but there's only so much I can do. My real fear is I get hundreds of DMs, emails, messages a day. I cannot possibly read them all. And I live in fear as someone who speaks out on men's and boys' issues of missing one of them. And somebody
one that slips through the cracks.
Because I don't know, thank God to my knowledge, it hasn't happened yet. But, and it brings up a point and kind of shift the focus a little bit is, when we're talking about men's issues like this, right? We're talking about it in relation to family court, but men are unaliving themselves for a lot of different reasons. But in general, men's issues, how do we start approaching it societally to address some of these? I wanted to get your thoughts on that. Something like, you and I are trying to help, but there's only so much we can do. We have limited resources. I don't have the training, right? I have a little bit of training, but I am not capable of handling that. What are your thoughts? What are the biggest struggles, I guess, other than family court, that you think fathers and men are facing right now, and some thoughts on what we need to do?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is the whole toxic masculinity angle. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's been in the news everywhere. That's been a big thing since, I guess it really probably started hitting its stride like 2017, 2018, where
Me too.
You had all these major retailers picking it up and talking about toxic masculinity. You had Super Bowl commercials about it. We've come to this point where anytime a man, whether he's a father or just a single guy out there, shows emotions, oh my God, he's toxic. Okay. We have emotions. Okay. We have to be able to show them. Just because we show them doesn't mean that we're toxic. We need to move away from that whole perception that every dude out there who gets upset, cries, whatever the case is, toxic. Because I see that time and time again. I see it in my comments all the time. Well, it's just toxic masculinity, blah, blah, blah. It's a catchword. It's the flavor of the month. We need to start moving away from that. We need to start changing the way mainstream media looks at fathers, looks at men. Because if you look at like The Simpsons, Family Guy, shows like that, the father is always portrayed as a bumbling idiot. And that propagates down through society. We need to start moving away from that. We need to start understanding that men are every bit as important as women.
Amen.
Because it's one of the things that nobody wants to talk about. And I'm not trying to be sexist or anything like that, but everything that a woman has, the car she drives, all this other stuff, that's because of a man. You guys need to understand that and stop the whole class warfare that we've got going on. The feminists against the men against the feminists. At the end of the day, what does it solve? It's not solving anything. It's making matters worse.
Exactly.
I think we need to start opening up a dialogue about that and realizing that.
The problem we have is we try and open that dialogue, and they come right back to use your term, you're a toxic man, or you're bitter, or I hear the same thing.
You're mansplaining.
You're mansplaining. And it's my viewpoint on all of it is you're trying to silence us because you realize that what we're bringing up, the issues, the feelings, the opinions, are real. Right. I had this happen the other day where I was talking about boys in school and how they're struggling. And, of course, I got the feminists coming at me going, well, you're just a bitter old blah, blah, old white guy, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, you sit there and you go, well, why would they say something like that, right? It's because in their mindset, it's a zero-sum game. I talk about it all the time, that if you take even 1 second to discuss the issues boys are facing, then you're taking away from the girls. And this applies by domestic violence is another beautiful example of that. We can't have $1 towards helping male victims because it's got to come from the female victims when no one who ever advocates for open a male shelter has ever said take $1 away from the female. And it goes back to what you were talking about, that toxic masculinity, which did ramp up. Me Too is what triggered it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But I also think, and I want to touch on one of the things you were talking about, the Homer Simpson thing. And I've shared this before. I grew up in the late 60s, early 70s. The Brady Bunch was the big show for children back then. You go back and look at that. Every instance, they always had the boys against the girls things. The girls won.
Mm-hmm.
And you could go further back than that, but it portrays to the boys that they're always losers. The girls are always better. My contention is from birth, boys are made to feel other or, othered or feel lesser than. And then it leads into where we're at as adults, right? We struggle with sharing our emotions, our feelings. We feel like we're not capable of doing it. In many cases, we aren't. And then it triggers all these other issues. I agree with you on a lot of that because that's the number one thing I think that needs to be done to fix it is getting that perception changed because men do matter.
Absolutely.
Forget even your point on building cars is absolutely valid and all that, but just as human beings, we're human beings. You want us to be robots, but we're not capable of that. We're human beings. But how do we change it? I mean, the media is not going to do it. So what were your thoughts on that?
Man, that's tough. That's another one of these questions that, unfortunately I don't have an answer.
Exactly.
You can do the grassroots thing. It's like you and I and these other creators that are putting out, father's rights material, men's rights material, and hoping that, it catches. It starts a brush fire, which starts a forest fire. Other than that, honestly, without really sitting down and really deeply thinking, that's about the best answer that I can give for you right now is just grassroots.
Well, that's for the men listening to this. What Alan just said is the answer, in my opinion. Sharing your story. We talked about it earlier, right? We need to get out. We need to share our stories. And this kind of goes into another topic I wanted to bring up with you. As someone who is a men's rights activist, father's rights activist, which, are bad terms. They love to label us that you're a horrible human being if you're a father's rights activist. Just because I talk about issues that fathers go through or men and boys, that makes me a horrible human being. But, the point of contention that I have is that we can't get men to come together. I talk about it all the time. I go back to the early 70s, seeing that next wave of feminism come in, where the National Organization of Women, the women all came together under that. It's kind of fallen apart from that now, but for the 70s, 80s, 90s, into the aughts, they were a very, very powerful organization. But we've never had that on the men's side. Why do you think that is? I'm curious to get your opinion on that.
And I think from purely looking at this through the lens of a father's rights activist, I think it comes back to what we talked about earlier is men are scared. I think that's the number one driving factor is, men are, I liken it like this. And I've said this many, many times before. Men are really, really phenomenal about talking about everything that's wrong with society, with themselves, with whatever the situation would be. We're very great about voicing that. We're really piss poor about taking actions to correct it.
Exactly.
I think that's the biggest problem is that, Joe Schmo can throw all this stuff on his social media, but when push comes to shove, he's not going to do anything to actively make changes. He would rather just be silent and just go about his life and throw up the, oblique quote every now and again, or the post referencing it, but he's not going to put any skin into the actual game. And I think that's kind of where we sit at is men love to talk about it, but we just really suck about actually doing something about it.
Why though? Do you think you mentioned fear? That this is where the crux of the whole thing for me, right? You and I, we're willing to put ourselves out there. Mm-hmm. I do think some of it is fear in the sense that they see the horrific stuff thrown at you and me, and they're worried it's going to hit them. I get that part of it. But even if you take that out of the equation, these guys will bitch and moan. They love to whine. So I put it a little less diplomatic than you do. Men love to bitch, moan, and whine, but take one piece of action, they won't do it.
Yeah.
So I guess, but what's interesting is as men, though, when we see a problem, what's our normal reaction? To fix it.
To fix it.
This is the one area, though, as men, we won't try and take action to fix it. That's what I'm trying to figure out. How the hell is it we can look at a medical disease, an architectural issue, any issue you want, flying to the moon, okay? All of those. Men will jump on board, dive in, kill themselves literally to make it happen. But get them to help fund a domestic violence shelter, get them to write a letter to their congressman, they won't do it. Why? I would. Any thoughts on that?
Man, it's that's another tough one. You're full of tough questions.
I am full of tough ones. I know. You know why I'm asking them out? I'll be honest with you. Because these are the same questions I ask myself all the time, right? Yeah. And having someone who does the same thing that I do, I'm looking for the same answers that you are and that we all are.
I absolutely agree. And I've tried time and time again to get a march going for fathers' rights. Because if you look back a couple of years ago, the Million Woman March.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they knocked it out of the freaking park. You can't get 100 guys together to do the same thing. You can't get a guy in every city to put something together. I think it's just general apathy. They don't want to deal with it. If it doesn't affect them, they don't care. Out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. Whereas the women are really good about banding together for a cause and taking that cause and making it their own. Fathers, nope. They don't do it. I don't know why, other than a general lack of apathy, or they've never experienced it. It's not their problem. So,
but even the ones deal with it. Even the ones though, Alan, that experience it, they go to family court, they get destroyed. They'll bitch about it, but they won't take action. And that's where I think the fundamental issue is why we are at where we're at, because until we do, nothing's going to change.
Well, and the family court thing, I think that just comes back down to just being afraid, being scared. Mm-hmm. They got destroyed in family court, and they're holding on to just this little bitty, teeny bit of visitation, whatever it is, and they don't want to rock that boat because it's so easy for an upset mother, I won't say a bitter baby mama, but an upset mother to find out what, he's saying and go back after him and take the rest of it away. Mm. I've seen that happen. I've talked to guys where that's happened. So they will talk about it, but once it reaches a point where actually doing something about it, it's outside of their comfort level. They're paralyzed by fear. They just cannot literally physically bring themselves to do it because of the potential consequences of doing that.
Well, yeah, and I mean, another issue I had brought up earlier this week in a couple of my videos, I was talking about, because I've been starting to throw topics of discussion out, trying to drive conversation along the lines of what we're talking about. And one of the things I'm throwing out is, have you ever seen bias against men in the workplace? And almost, I don't know, between all my social medias, there were hundreds of comments, almost universally saying yes. And to a few of them, I said, well, what did you do about it? And I have yet to have a single one say they did anything. Which my point, and I've shared the story myself, is I remember this is when I was a high-level executive. They brought in, this was when they wanted to talk about harassment. They were trying to address it. So they hired this outside firm to come in and do a workshop on it. Whole day workshop, we're going to buy pizza for lunch, all this big deal. Ugh. Anyway, the woman is sitting there. Every piece of paper she handed out, every pamphlet, every one of her PowerPoint slides, every example she gave showed a man harassing a woman.
Mhm.
Now, I am not the most shy of people, as I'm sure shocked many of my followers to hear. Um, and I raised my hand and I go, you're presenting every case of a woman being harassed by a male. Don't you believe men get harassed by women? The woman was ready to kill me, right?
Oh, I'm sure.
But did I suffer repercussions from doing that? Not really, right? It did get, by the way, the following Monday, we had our executive meeting. It did get thrown in my face. But I also said, is the company's policy then? If we're going to say that what she was saying is correct, is the company's policy that men cannot be harassed? They don't like hearing that one, right? Because that puts them in a legal bind. And that's where if guys did more of that, overcame that fear, sure, you could lose your job. But at some point, do you want a job where you're literally scared to be in the building? Because all she's got to do is make, you don't have to do a thing. They could literally make something up and you've lost your career.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we get...
And that does happen.
Happens all the time. All the time. How do we get the guys to overcome it, though? I guess that's the big issue that I think we as men's rights activists, fathers' rights activists, men in general, we need to come together on. And then the next step is get that one voice out there, the equivalent of the National Organization of Women. What do you see happening in the next months, years, decades to try and drive that? Do you think it's even possible?
Well, I think it's possible. I think what we need to do, like what we were talking about before we started doing the recording, as coalescing together, getting me, you, these other creators all on the same page, because that's another thing that I see. I see these creators that have big followings like you and I do. We intersect in some areas, but in other areas we're off doing our own thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If we can come together with one general message and really start pushing that message hard, I think that starts making a difference.
Mm-hmm.
If we can get that to catch and start driving it, I think we're going to be better off. I would like to think that in the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be, I don't want to say equal because I don't think it'll generally ever be equal, but it'll be a lot further along than what we are in the next 5 to 10 years. We have a lot of work to do, obviously, to get to that point. But I think it's definitely possible.
I don't want to paint too negative a picture because I do think we've turned the corner. I've talked about this many times. I think COVID was the game changer for men. They realized, one, they can be alone. Yep. Two, they started realizing just how far down they are in society. They saw it. And I think it did waken people up. I think that's some of the driving point, by the way, way back we were talking about boys reaching out to us. I think they're more likely to do so because of that. I think the men's movement has made a tremendous amount of progress in the last year. I really do. Yeah. We saw shared parenting pass in 2 states. Many other states are getting closer. I think it'll eventually be a tidal wave. False allegations there isn't a day that goes by now I don't find another one.
Yeah,
that's been found out literally every day now. So I think awareness is being raised, and if we can get guys to take action, it will make a difference. But to your point, where I wanted to kind of go with this, is we are fractured in what we want to work on, right?
Yep.
And one of the things we talked about it off air, there's a bunch of us as creators were talking about it. It's like, can we coalesce on maybe 2 or 3 issues to really focus on? Doesn't mean we're ignoring the other ones. But what would be the top, let's say, 3 issues? So I wanted to ask you, put you on the spot again. You notice I like to do that to you, but you're my friend.
That's pretty much what this whole podcast has been.
Exactly.
I like it.
Exactly. Putting you on the spot, and I'll give my 3 after you give yours 3. What would you put as the top 3 things that men or men's groups, however you want to phrase it, should be focusing on right now in 2024?
Fatherlessness. Okay. That's my number 1. False allegations are number 2, because those kind of go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. They kind of dovetail into one another. And then the third one, let's see, revision of the family court system.
Okay.
because the family court system also encompasses divorce court. Divorce court plays into that. So for me, those are my top three that I would love to work on because fatherlessness is, oh my God, it's infects so many areas of the family. I mean, there's plenty of studies out there that show that fathers play such an important role into the family. There was a study, it was a couple of years ago that was done. I want to say it was done during COVID. But basically, they went through and they looked at fatherless homes and the kind of kids that come out of fatherless homes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they are the lowest producing kids and the highest at risk kids at the same time. Teen pregnancy, STDs, alcoholism, drug abuse, crime, the whole nine yards.
Mm-hmm.
It's like 70 or 80% of kids that come from fatherless homes fall into that particular demographic. Um, we need to start working on that. We need to really start reinforcing just how important fathers are, in the overall scheme of things.
Well, to your point, Warren Farrell wrote Boys in Crisis 7
Yes.
years ago. I had him on the podcast a couple months back, and that was the point he was making. Is even though the book was focused on boys, a lot of what he was saying applied to girls also, right?
Yeah.
Every societal issue that we see on every level can be in some way traced back to fatherlessness.
Mm-hmm.
That's my number one issue, by the way, that I think we need to work on. And I would change it as we need to change that mindset that we're bumbling idiots, that type of thing, right?
Yes.
That's my number one. My number two is boys in education, meaning the educational system is failing boys. And three is DV. We don't have shelters for men. But you notice we're not that far apart on all these things because they all interact. And that's where I think one of the things that we need to do as men is come together, a lot of us, and say, all right, there are all these issues. Doesn't mean mine's better or worse than yours, but what are the ones, one, will have the most dramatic effect, and two, we can affect? Because some of these things we can't right now. Like revising family court, it's sure we want to, but it ain't happening anytime soon.
Yeah.
Shared parenting, though, that's a realistic goal. Share parenting in let's say all 50 states or in all Western countries, however you want to phrase it. This is what I think, for those listening, if you're a man, this is where you need to step up, right? Is say, okay, maybe you can't give money, but I always make the argument, if every man who went through a divorce gave $1 a year, we would have domestic violence shelters in every state for men.
What is there, like 2 domestic violence shelters?
There's 2
for
in
men?
the entire country.
Yeah.
So now think about it. We have 350 million people in this country. There are over 2,000 shelters for men or women, as there should be. All we're saying is, can we have one in each state right now? Then we'll take care of it from there. But we can't even get that. And us guys...
feminists are all about equality, so why can't we have equality?
Right. But even as men, getting the politicians will fund it if they see us stepping up. So if you can't give $1, there's 7 million fathers out there that are going through divorce right now. If every one of them gave $1, that's it. Imagine the change that would have. That's where, again, if you're listening to this podcast and you're hearing Alan, you're hearing me talk, is take action. Doesn't mean you have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. Doesn't mean you have to spend hours doing podcasts or videos like we do. Even just liking and sharing our videos helps. It's those things.
Well, even just talking about it within your friend group.
Yeah, if you're,
that's another big one.
That's a great point you just made. And it's funny because you're out with friends, and sometimes you'll start hearing them bash men, women.
Yep.
Call them out on it. Doesn't mean you have to be nasty or mean. Why would you say that? The look on their face is priceless. They'll say some negative thing about men, and I'm like, why would you say that? Do you think that about me? Oh no, not you. No. Well, then why would you say that?
Why would you say it?
And get them thinking, because the majority of the time they're just parroting what others are saying. Women like to be part of a group, and I'm not saying that as a negative, but they're in their nature. And so they like to go along with what everybody else wants. So they'll do that. But yeah, I think one of the big issues that we as men, the work you're doing, the work I do, the work many other guys are doing, is we need to lead and get guys taking action. Because if you want to change it, if you take nothing else away from this podcast right now, it's do something. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's so many different things that you can do. Like we were talking about, like a post, share a post, leave a comment, talk to your friends about this kind of stuff. If you see a video that Dan makes, or you see a video that I make, and you're out with your buddies on Friday night, hey, check out this post that Alan did, or this post that Dan did. What do you guys think about that? It's simple little things. Like Dan said, it's not all about money. Yeah, money's great. If you can give $1, whatever the case may be, that's fabulous. But there's so many other things that you can actually do to kind of help propagate change. It's up to you to not be apathetic and to, do these kind of things. It's, how long does it take to click a like or to share something? It doesn't take long at all.
Takes literally tenths of a second to hit the like button.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
exactly.
It helps you if you like anything, or you agree with something where you're like, geez, that's a good point, just hit that like button. That's all you
Yeah, because it changes the algorithm. It pushes it out to more and more people.
And we're fighting the algorithm because it doesn't like us.
Nope.
So, all right, Alan, it's about time to
silence us.
Yeah, they would. It's about time to wrap things up. Speaking of seeing your videos, how can people follow you?
Oh, easy. Instagram. Just go to Instagram, type in Fathers Lives Matter. You're going to see me right there. I've got other social media, but to be perfectly honest with you, I don't do a whole lot outside of Instagram. I've got a TikTok. I've got Facebook. They're all Fathers Lives Matter. I've got X. Just type in Fathers Lives Matter and you will find me. I do a podcast most Fridays on Instagram. It's called The Father's Truth. You can go to Instagram Live and watch it there. And then it's also uploaded to all your major podcast sponsors, Google Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher. Just type in The Father's Truth and you'll find me on there as well. That's the easiest way to find me. DM me. The one thing I will tell you, it is just me running this account. I do not have anybody else doing it. So it does take me a while to get back to your messages. But I like to say that even though I'm a decent sized account, I pride myself on getting back to you. So I don't want you to just think that you're just throwing it out there into the universe and you'll never hear from me. You will hear from me. It's just going to take a hot minute for me to get to you.
I need to take lessons from you on how to do that, because let me tell you, my friend, I would be years behind trying to get to all my DMs. And I encourage people, seriously, follow Alan on Instagram. The stuff that you share is educational more than anything else. It's raising awareness, and I enjoy it. You have some fun stuff too. I want to put that. It's a serious topic, but sometimes you make it pretty fun.
I try to throw some fun stuff in.
You do,
there because you can't have gloom and doom 24/7.
And let me tell you, if you go back, was it about 6 months ago? You were doing the lady,
the lady
SB. Scroll back and go watch what Alan did, and it was amazing. That's kind of how we got to know each other, because we talked about taking action. You took some action. I mean, you literally called, I think, everybody in Toronto. She's in Toronto. Yeah. I think everybody in Toronto. And I applaud you for doing that and being a role model for others. So
I'm still in contact with the Toronto Police Department, going back and forth on this. I still email them regularly and be like, hey, what's going on with this? You have somebody that is on many podcasts. It wasn't just that one podcast.
Exactly.
She was on numerous podcasts spreading that stuff. And for those of you who don't know, basically she went on a podcast, the Real Toronto Podcast, and talked about how she filed false child abuse claims against an ex-boyfriend because she did not like him. She went on to say that she doctored the images of his children, and the caseworker showed up. I mean, that is a huge allegation. That's something where he could conceivably lose his kids.
Yep.
And she was laughing and smiling and all joking about it. But I reached out to Toronto CAS, which is the Canadian version of CPS. I talked to several people in that organization. I also talked to the Toronto Police Department about this whole thing. Unfortunately, nobody really wants to do anything about it, but I'm still prodding them. Hell, Dan, I even talked to her music producer.
Really? I didn't know that one.
Him one-on-one.
What did he say? Just out of curiosity, what did he say?
Okay, so this music, I'm not going to mention his name because he asked me not to.
Sure.
But he is a multi-platinum music producer. He is well known. He has worked on some of the biggest hip hop albums in the last decade. So he's a really big dude. Because I called him out on several posts saying, hey, is this what you are wanting to be associated with? This is what she's promoting. And he actually took the time to message me and we talked back and forth. And, he told me point blank, he said, Alan, I told her not to say that stuff. Mm-hmm. I told her not to do that. And she went ahead and did it. He went on to say that as a recording artist, she's not very good. That she is mostly TNA. That's what she's selling. Mm-hmm. She's trying to be the next Cardi B kind of thing. And that she was told point blank, do not do that. He goes, I don't know if what she did, she actually did. I don't know if she did it for a pop or clout, but she was told point blank to not do it. He further went on to state that he would not be working with her again in the future.
See, that right there. Gentlemen, listen to that. That's how you make a difference.
Yeah.
It took some effort, and you put in the effort without question, but that's how you make a difference.
It took a lot of work, but like I was saying, I'm still in touch with Toronto Police. I'm trying to get to the chief of police, but they have them very well insulated. And every time I call, they're like, God, it's this dude again. It's getting to the point where I'm like on a first name basis with some of these officers, like where I'm like, hey, how was your weekend? And I'm like, can I talk to the chief? Nope, chief's not here. I was like, okay, well, let him know. Alan Donovan from Fathers Lives Matter is calling again.
Well, I will put a link to your Instagram in the show notes. If you could be so kind, send me the link to the original video.
Yes,
the one you played off. I'll put that in the show notes so people can go watch it so they know what we're talking about. And to just make one comment, I tried to listen to her music. I got to be honest with you, I'm not a fan of rap to begin with. I'd rather hear, I don't know, pick your worst sound ever than that. But,
dude, I'd rather hear cats screaming and howling and fighting.
Yeah. I don't think I lasted. I was trying to be fair. I don't think I lasted 20 seconds. I don't like rap to begin with, so to be honest.
Well, I watched one of her videos, like when this whole thing first started, and because how it started is she made the video, or she was on the podcast. The podcast released that segment of the video. Right away, I started getting tagged. Mm-hmm. I got tagged like 500 times in this video through various, sources and pages. And finally, I responded and kind of did a video talking about it. And I thought, you know what? I should probably go and watch her video so I can get a better grasp of what it is that this is. Mm-hmm. Man, I watched that video. It's basically softcore porn.
Essentially,
when you get right down to it.
Yeah.
That's essentially what it is. And I was just like, holy Christ, she is taking the Cardi B, Kim K, this sexy red business model and trying to use this to boost herself. Yep. It was sad.
It was. All right, my friend, we are time to wrap things up. Any final thought you want to share with the audience?
Like we've been talking about this entire podcast, if you're a father, if you're just a dude out there trying to make a way to go about doing things, be vocal, tell your story. If you have a story to tell, don't be scared to tell it. Be loud, be proud. That's my biggest thing, man, because nothing is going to change for us guys until we actually start doing these things that we've been talking about in this podcast. Be real and, be proud of who you are. Be proud of the guy that you are. Don't let anybody tell you different.
Amen, brother. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure for me. This flew by, to be honest with you. I was looking down at the time and went, oh, crap, I got to wrap things up. Very educational. I truly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come on the show. And I definitely want to have you back in the future. And I do want to say thank you for all that you do. I appreciate it, and I know many others do.
Absolutely. And Dan, thank you for having me on the show. It was, like you said, a great pleasure and a great honor. I love talking to other men that are in the same space I am and hearing, the differing perspectives and viewpoints. And thank you for what you do. Every time one of your videos comes up, I watch it, and you're always on point with what you're saying.
I
You
try.
know, well, and I think it's starting to resonate. I think we're getting to a tipping point where people are starting to catch on, and just keep doing what you're doing, man. And I would love to have you on The Father's Truth, and I want to hear your story coming from being an alienated child and parent yourself. I would love to have you on the show and talk about that.
I will absolutely do your show. As soon as we go off air, we will arrange it.
Sounds
It
good,
would be
brother.
my pleasure. All right. I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up. Guys, if you've watched this far, you must have liked what you were hearing, right? So, how about that thumbs up? All right. Give us that thumbs up. And hey, Alan and I, we're here to help you. That's our goal. We're not really doing this for ourselves. We're doing it to help other men, to help fathers, and really to raise awareness on the issues that men and boys face in today's society. And the best way to do that is to speak about them, as we've talked about during the show. And the way you can help out with that is, like I said, give me that like, follow Alan and myself, share our stuff, subscribe to us, follow us, all that good stuff. It does help the algorithm. And yes, I'm shamelessly pandering to get you to do it right now. I don't deny it. All right. Great show. Thanks to Alan for being on. We'll see you next time on Men Need to Be Heard.